This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome back to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast, helping take your leadership to the next level. It's my pleasure to be joined, as always, by Dr. Richard Blackaby.
Good to see you, Sam. You've been kind of in seclusion here of late, have you not?
Yeah, we've had a bit of a quarantine at our household, and my whole family got COVID, and
kind of an unusual way too. You and Carrie are pretty good about being safe and careful.
Yeah, ours is, what we think has happened was my mom had gotten it, and as you know, she keeps Claire, our almost 2-year-old, and but she'd gotten sick, and she got 2 negative tests. So I said, okay, well, I think everything's fine.
You thought it was maybe bronchitis or something else?
Yeah, something else, whatever. Mm-hmm. But then Claire got sick. And then Carrie got sick, and then I got sick, and they were all tracking, just one right after another. And I said, well, let me just go and I'll just get tested, just to rule that out. Mm-hmm. Well, sure enough.
It didn't rule it out.
It ruled it in.
And by that time, my wife had been watching your precious little daughter as well.
Yeah, and so
my wife got it tested positive as well. So
yeah, so we really believe in sharing, and
can't say he never gave us anything.
Exactly. Don't be ungrateful. But it spending almost 2 weeks quarantined with a toddler and no relief, and at one point Carrie was just about bedridden for at least a day. Just a brutal experience.
And you guys are healthy, young adults. So you run, you're in good shape, eat well. So it slammed you.
Yeah, and you could probably still even tell in my voice a little bit. It's, I'm still got a little bit of a runny nose, but it was not a fun time. We were hoping, we'll just kick it and then we'll have, 10 days or so at home to just kind of
catch up on some house repairs,
house projects, and but no, it was a lot rougher than we were anticipating.
And I think what kind of caught us by surprise is that we've been very safe and careful, and this COVID has gone on, as our listeners know. It just seems it just keeps on going, and I think for a lot of folks, just the fact, I think there's a weariness. Everybody can handle a pandemic for a month or two, but... it was, 2 weeks and slow the spread or flatten the curve, a year ago. Yeah. And so... I had speaking trips canceled last May because of COVID, and they were rescheduled for this coming May, and now they're uncertain whether to not cancel it again a year later.
Yeah.
And so
enough of that just kind of wears a guy out.
Yeah. So I certainly, and I won't get too far into it, but I think even a lot of the politics and the division and the angst and anger, there's lots of reasons for it, obviously, but some of that I think is just people are worn out. They just emotionally don't have the bandwidth to handle more bad news, more negative things taking place, and which kind of leads in just to our topic this week is, what do you do, especially if you're in a leadership role? How do you keep a positive attitude? How do you prevent yourself from just going down with the ship and emotionally just being exhausted and frayed and discouraged? Leaders don't necessarily have just the luxury of giving up and quitting, and it just seems like sometimes life will come at you wave upon wave, just one after another slamming you. And so I mentioned my wife tested positive about a little over a week ago, 8 or 9 days ago, and so I've been sharing a house with her for the last time period, knowing that she's positive with COVID and I'm not, and I've got I think I've shared before, we live in a house here in Atlanta, but I've never been able to sell my house I had in Greenville, South Carolina. So I've been renting it out and trying to sell it. It's costing me money. And the same week, both houses developed leaks in the roof, and and so I've got both. I've got all these repairs. I've got a wife with COVID. I've got canceled trips that I was expecting to do, and so many different issues that there's times you just have to kind of pull up the reins and say, Lord, as a leader, just help me to get some perspective here. I just feeling a little overwhelmed. I don't want to check my emails to find out what has broken down now, what unexpected expense I'm going to have to face now, who's just developed COVID, or who's died from COVID or something else.
I have a professor of mine died of COVID, a couple of weeks ago. And, I think if, whether it's happened to you personally or not, you can easily look around today, and there are lots of reasons to spiral down into the depths of despair, as Anne Shirley would say. Yeah. And so how do you, what are perhaps some tactics, some strategies? Because, there's plenty to despair about. There's plenty to be upset about. There's plenty, whether personally or just as a country, as the world, as the church. There's so many things that if you focus on those things, for good reason, you would be upset.
Yeah. I've got a friend that I've ministered with a number of times. His brother and sister both died of COVID, and one after the other. And when you see that, it just emotionally just wears you down when you're just trying to, even on Facebook, just encourage friends that are their dad is fighting for his life right now, and you're trying to just be an encouragement to so many, it seems, that are carrying a load. And so I thought it would be good just to maybe share a couple of things that I found at least helpful. Perhaps would be helpful to you as well. And so let me just list a couple of things. And again, this is not trying to be some trite, simplistic list of here, do this and everything will be fine. But there's certainly, I think leaders especially have got to have a certain strategy to say, especially in tough times, I just am going to go through some of these routines because they've just been tried and tested. And the first one is just regularly check in with God and remind yourself that he's still on his throne. And I love the story in Isaiah chapter 6 where the king has just died. King Uzziah, he was a king for over 50 years. The economy has been very prosperous under his reign. He's built up the military. There's peace, there's prosperity. People have not seen such wealth and economic success since the time of Solomon. And then he dies. And of course, all this leadership, government change is causing all kinds of consternation, worry, fretting, and what's it going to be like? What does the future hold? And at that time, Isaiah goes to church, and he goes to the temple. And when he gets there, he has a vision and he sees God upon his throne, and it blows him away. And what I think you just have to go back to passages like that on a regular basis, especially in crisis. Go to Isaiah 6 and be reminded that just like in Isaiah's time, God is still on his throne. He has now governments come and go. Presidents come and go every 4 years. You have another election. Even the best presidents or the worst presidents, in 4 years you have a chance to change things up. But when Isaiah goes into the temple, he sees God seated comfortably on his throne where he has been since before the beginning of time. He's never left. And he's just as powerful. He's carrying out his plans and purposes just as he always has. And the sight overwhelms Isaiah. All he can say is, "Woe is me." And I really want our listeners just to be reminded that when you've been watching the news for too long and you've seen what the pundits and panels of experts have to say about the world as we live in today, you need to have an Isaiah 6 vision of God as well. Mm-hmm. And just be reminded that he is on his throne. And when you see, the interesting thing is Isaiah goes to church worried about government, worried about politics, the economy, and so on, taxes, whatever. Once he sees God on his throne, he never mentions those things again. I mean, it doesn't matter anymore. Once he sees God still on his throne, still carrying out his purposes, just like he always does, he realizes as long as God is on his throne, it will work out. Things will be okay. God has not forsaken me or my country or his plan, his kingdom. And so I need to just take a deep breath. And it doesn't minimize the fact that, my wife might have COVID right now, or that I've got to pay to get a roof repaired. But it just means that in the big scheme of things, God is still in charge. He's not lost control. And we just need to be regularly reminded of that. God is still on his throne. I just have to periodically just remind myself of that simple fact. God is on his throne. Governments come and go. God is still on his throne. And my focus needs to be on God, not on people. The second thing I would say is just take an eternal view, or take a long view. You can't just... Any single day can be very discouraging. If in the same day you find out that you're going to have to replace the roofs of 2 houses, and you're looking at your bank account saying, okay, how's this going to happen? Or your wife texts you and says, I just tested positive, and you've been hanging around her every day around the house before that, and so on. You can kind of look at that and say, well, what a horrible life I'm in right now. But life is lifelong. You can't measure your life based on a day or a week or a month or even a year. God, of course, is eternal. And God is a God who 1,000 years to him is like a day. And so he is from before time even began. God existed and was functioning. And so when you look at your life, you have to keep a longer view. Certainly leaders have to do that. When you look at your company, your organization, your church, everything is going to have tough times. There's no doubt about it. But time passes and times change, and the bad news eventually sort of weakens, and you start to get some good news popping up, and you just have to persevere. That's why I guess I've always been a big fan of history, because when you have a historic view, you realize it's not always bad. The tide goes out, but the tide eventually comes back in historically. And so I realized, wow, hopefully this is the low ebb today. Hopefully I've been hit and slammed with the bulk of the bad news, at least for the time being. Now I just need to kind of wait for some good news to start rolling in. And of course, when you have an eternal view, that means that there will be people that will die of cancer, of COVID, of other things. And hopefully, prayerfully, those people knew Christ. And I have to be reminded that even this week, I've heard of some godly people that passed into eternity. And it seems like every week I'm hearing of some people right now that are doing that. Fortunately, most of the people that I've heard of, at least, were believers. And I have no doubt whatsoever that for them, they are having the time of their life right now. They are experiencing joy. They are, I'm sure, through their minds, they're thinking, I thought I had some kind of sense of what heaven would be like, but it is unbelievably beyond what I could have imagined for good. And so I think eventually we'll all be there, and we'll all realize, looking back on our brief sojourn across this life, that we worried and fretted about a whole lot of things that in the big scheme of things we didn't need to worry about. And So I think you have to just always step back and take a longer view. When you feel overwhelmed by your day or your week or your month, it's time to step back and get a bit broader, longer view of what you're going through.
Yeah.
A third thing I'd say is just escape, that may be foremost on your mind right now, but sometimes you just have to get out from under the weight, the pressure of the load that you're carrying. And again, leaders carry an extra load, and there's times where I think it's perfectly fine to just push aside the burden, the load, at least for a temporary escape. And of course, throughout history, sometimes that's come from great literature. You read a classic book. I'll tell you, when I've had some really heavy loads where I had a lot of writing to do, a lot of blogs or books or things I was needed to write, and I feel the load, and a lot of times I'll stay up late, as late as I can, at least till my bedtime, just still trying to crank out work, and you're tired, and then you're kind of shuffling off to bed finally. And sometimes I've just found, you know what, at 9 o'clock tonight, I'm going to stop working, and I'm going to pull up a book by Dickens, or I'm going to just pull up a Christian classic, and I'm going to just read just for the sheer delight of being swept up into another world, another time, into someone else's life, and just rest my brain, rest my thoughts. Maybe watch a classic movie that has stood the test of time, not just some, recent release of Netflix, but something that is that really addresses noble thoughts, great thoughts, inspirational thoughts. I think this is kind of what the Sabbath is meant to be. Yeah. God built in a break time every week in people's lives. I think God is the designer. He's the manufacturer of human beings, and He understood that you can't just be going hard 7 days a week, 24/7. We were made to take breaks, and that doesn't just mean that you don't go into work one day. It means that all of the weight emotionally that you carry, all the concerns, the burdens, the load that you carry, as best you can, you at least relieve yourself of that. You just sort of set that aside for at least an hour or two and say, I'm going to just have a Sabbath right now. I'm going to just read scripture. I'm going to pray. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to have a nap. I'm going to just, there's times I've had to just say, I know I'm going to have to address this issue, but for the next hour, I refuse to think about it. I need to let my brain shut off and be swept up into thoughts about God, thoughts just about great literature, another time, insights from similar people who went through difficult times themselves, and read some of the answers that God gave them, but escape. And so by escaping, I don't necessarily mean that you just live in a world that's not real, a make-believe world, or a Pollyanna kind of, well, everything will be fine in the end. No, you realize these are serious issues, but I'm going to just not put that on the forefront of my thinking for the next hour or two. I'm going to just rest my emotions, and to do that. And also, I think sometimes a fourth thing would be, there are times you just need to better yourself. When you're in the midst of difficult time, stop and think, is there a way perhaps to salvage some positive things from this? And certainly with COVID, I'm up now, I think I'm approaching about 60 cancellations of trips and speaking events I was supposed to go on. And so some of that's I've done virtually and through Zoom and other means, but some it's just been, we're canceling for now. We'll get back to you next year if things once settle down, and so on. And so I just made a commitment to say, now I could look at 50 or 60 canceled trips and think, wow, look at all the ministry I could have done, the revenue our ministry could have taken in, and so on. Instead, I need to just say, so how can I better myself? And so I've shared on previous podcasts, I've been running and getting longer distances, losing weight. I've been writing books and doing different things to say, how can I salvage this time? Our ministry has online classes that we offer. We're doing an Experiencing God online class right now. And it's been great to hear from people who've said, I've always wanted to take Experiencing God, but I didn't have time. And I'm on a quarantined at home right now, and I can't do my normal work. And or I was let go temporarily for the next few months until things turn around. And so I decided, instead of sitting around just complaining about how hard life is, I'd sign up for a class and get engaged in things that get me thinking and stretching and inspiring. And so sometimes even in the midst of a crisis, actually is some of the best times for you to be growing personally in your faith, in your walk with God. And so it might even be time. I know people during this COVID season that have decided to go back and finish off that degree from college that they never finished, and they're going online and finishing off a degree, getting some more credits and so on. And I sort of have the tendency to say, this has been tough, no doubt about it. But I want to look back on this time and not just see it all as negative. I want to say, yeah, there's a lot of negative stuff that happened, but I did earn a degree that I didn't have before. I wrote that book. I took that class. I checked some boxes of things I'd always wanted to do. And even though life was really hard in all these ways, look what I did accomplish during that same time.
Yeah, in times like this, it's easy. What you don't want to do is get to the end of it and life goes back to some kind of normalcy, and now you just have a year and a half that you didn't do anything.
Yeah,
nothing happened, and you just sort of paused your life for a year because of COVID or what have you, and so rather than that, pivot and see what can you do? How can you redeem the time? Probably not like what you thought it was going to be.
Right.
Obviously, none of us thought 2020 was going to be the way that it was in the beginning. But there have been so many good things that have come from it, like you said. And just because it's not what you expected doesn't mean that God can't do something during that time. And so let's take a quick break here, and we'll wrap up when we come back. Once a quarter, Richard Blackaby gives a conference call devotional for marketplace leaders in partnership with Workforce Ministries. Connect with this call via Zoom or on the telephone. The next call will be held on Wednesday, February 24th at noon Eastern Time. Visit workforceministries.org for the phone number and for the Zoom link. Links will also be in the show notes. So, Richard, I love this thought that you gave right before the break about redeeming the time and making the best of it, regardless of what you've been given. And, taking an unfortunate situation and still finding some good in it. What are perhaps, as we wrap up, a few more, and we've got a couple more things here to give our listeners that perhaps when they're in the rock bottom part, how can they still find hope and the courage to move on?
Yeah, I looked at regularly check in with God, see He's on His throne. Second, take an eternal or long view. Third, escape sometimes, just find a Sabbath from the load you're carrying. And fourth was just better yourself, find some ways to redeem the time. And seize what good you can. It might not be as good as what you hoped. Last year I had to cancel a trip. I was going to speak all over South Africa. I was going to be in Thailand. That got canceled. Several other, lot of real fun trips. But I wouldn't say that what I did necessarily was just as great, but I did finish off overhauled some books. I did speak on Zoom in a number of places that I might not have gone to otherwise. And so it's not that you can either focus on what you didn't do, or else you can say, yeah, but I did this good did happen.
Right.
A couple other things I'd say. Fifth thing is just journal. And there's a lot of studies that show that if you will just simply write down your thoughts and your processes as you're going through a difficult time, it's amazing how therapeutic that is. Just by writing down what you're fearing, the load you're carrying, what you're processing, what God is saying to you in the midst of your difficult time. So record your journey. And there's just something about committing to writing that makes your mind think through things and perhaps even see some things in the process that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. And so I find particularly take time to write and journal in hard times and put down your questions for God. God, right now, I'm just wondering why you'd let this fine man, great Christian dad, pastor, die of COVID. It doesn't make sense to me. Help me understand. And then maybe God gives you some scriptures and God just gives you an assurance that he's in control and that godly man is with him right now, even as you're asking the question. And God can assure you the man doesn't want to come back now that he sees what's been waiting for him all this time. So journal and write down what you're going through. A sixth thing, and again, I don't mean to make light of this, but seek to find joy in life, even in your hardest times. And again, that doesn't minimize if you've got a loved one dying of COVID on a ventilator in a hospital somewhere. Obviously, that's a bad thing. But God wired the human being to laugh, to find humor. Sometimes even in the midst of a battlefield, in a trench. You can sort of survive the hardship through laughter, through joy, and so find ways to seize even just a moment of pleasure, of human joy in your hard times. And with my wife having COVID, and then I needed to quarantine as well because I was here with her. We missed our twin grandson's 6th birthday, and so that was hard to miss that. But their parents, their dad brought over a couple of pieces of cake and left it on our front step, and we FaceTime with them and blew out candles over FaceTime. I tell you, there's nothing like FaceTiming with grandkids to change your perspective for at least a few moments. Finally, thankfully, hockey season has finally begun. At least until the first game of the season, my team was undefeated.
I was going to say, that may just add to the despair.
I'm not sure whether I should put this in the positive column or the negative column yet. But
depends on who you're cheering for, I guess.
And again, I'm not saying that you just become a sports addict junkie on TV, but it's the only sport I really ever watch on TV anymore is my hockey team. And it's something that my wife will watch with me. She's not going to watch football with me or baseball, but she will watch my hockey team out of just grace and kindness toward me. But and so we can kind of make it a big deal and, get some food and sit down and get a fire going and just say, here we are, we're both quarantined with COVID or potential COVID, but let's just sort of immerse ourselves in a game right now and just enjoy being together or let's FaceTime with our grandkids and check in with them. And there are some pleasures in life that you just may need to indulge yourself. You may just need to eat some dark chocolate. And again, I'm not trying to say chocolate is going to make someone dying of COVID okay. But what it's saying is, even in the worst of times, there are joys to be had. Yeah. And sometimes you almost feel guilty. Like, how can I have any joy knowing that someone's fighting for their life right now in a hospital room? But the fact is that you can genuinely care for the suffering and still experience the joy of the Lord at the same time. Yeah. And you only get one life. So if you put your joy in life on hold every time someone's going through a hard time, you're going to end up with a pretty miserable life. And so find a way to do both, to genuinely care and empathize with those who are hurting, but also to seize whatever joy and relief you can find along the way for yourself as well.
Well, and for us, even just we have a little bit of land at our house, and so just being able to go out on a sunny day, we were all feeling pretty crummy, but we're able to walk outside and see our animals, and just it's a small pleasure, but it's a joy that we were able to find. Yeah. Even when you're, secluded from family and friends.
And that sometimes, just watching birds outside your window, watching the sun come up. There are these universal pleasures of nature that you can seize. You can just find a calm and a peace from that sometimes that ministers to your soul, even in the midst of difficult times. A seventh thing would just be pray. And that really shouldn't be seventh. It should probably be first. But prayer is a way to take the burdens you carry and leave them with God. My wife, one of her favorite verses is 1 Peter 5:7. Peter says, casting all your cares upon him because he cares for you. And great verse. And the idea is, you're carrying the care right now. You're carrying the burden, the worry, the anxiety, but you have the opportunity, the choice to cast all those burdens on him and let him carry them for you instead. And so the weight's not on you anymore. It doesn't mean you don't have those cares, those concerns aren't real. It's just that God says, let me carry the emotional load of those cares for you. And but you have to decide to do that. If you choose to, you can carry the burden yourself and wear yourself out, or you can say, I can't carry this anymore. I just feel so bad for so many people. I had to lay off a bunch of people at my organization. I know they're in financial distress. I know that they've got loved ones who are sick. And I can just be eaten up inside with all the load I'm carrying, or in prayer, I can cast those cares onto him and say, God, please carry this for me. It doesn't minimize it. Doesn't mean that I don't care. It means I care so much, I can't even carry the load. I've got to have God help do it for me. And then an eighth thing, and maybe this would be the last one, is just seek to encourage others. When you are particularly just overwhelmed with the load that you're carrying. Like for me, I had 2 houses that both were leaking through the roof and needed repairs. And I'm thinking, you know what? That's a first world problem when you own 2 houses. Well, the bank owns 2 houses. I make payments on 2 houses, but there's a whole lot of people out there who would not feel the least bit sorry for me that I had to repair 2 houses that were in my name, at least. And so I found sometimes, and I tell you what, Facebook has a lot of its downsides, but one thing, when you go on Facebook these days, you stay up with how many people are fighting with COVID right now, with cancer. And I'll just tell you one thing I've tried to do as best I can. When I see someone, and I may not even necessarily know them, I've got friends and followers that I don't necessarily know personally, but when I see someone that says, pray for my dad, he's on a ventilator right now, they're saying he may never come off, pray for my mom, she's stage 4 cancer, and so on. As much as I can, I'll try to just write a comment and just say, hey, and honestly, just take a moment and pray. Just say, I prayed for your mother just now. I just wanted you to know. And try to just intentionally, actively encourage other people who are going through difficult times. And I'll tell you what, it does help put things in perspective. My wife is just recovering from COVID. You're recovering from it now. And you had it worse than my wife did, but we know a lot of people who had a lot worse than all of you guys.
Yeah, and for sure.
To say, I never had to go to the hospital. We had a couple of rough days, but boy, it doesn't take long to see people who had it much worse. And so I find somehow by just encouraging others, even when you're sick, even when you feel terrible, you've got COVID yourself, and then you see someone else who's parents are both in the hospital right now with COVID, and you think, well, let me encourage them and just pray for them and try to give them some hope and positive words and prayers. It helps you with your load, and it helps so much of dealing with adversity is perspective. And so when you have encouraged others with their load, it's amazing how your perspective changes as well. And so certainly you if you're looking for that, you could, every solitary day you can find people right now that you could encourage that are facing financial issues, health issues, questions about the future, trying to move on in their career, whatever else. So before, maybe after you hear this podcast, let me encourage you before this day is done, find someone just to send a positive word to of encouragement, and you'll be surprised how much better it makes you feel about what you're going through as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and it's certainly an encouraging word in these definitely trying times.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.